Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever. Today is Monday, February 9th. We're continuing a series we've been doing since early January, calling it our Legislative Preview Series. I guess now we're sort of, getting a little bit past the preview phase of the legislature.
Mid-view.
Started about a month or so ago, but today we're really pleased to welcome to the studio our two state senators from Bennington County and Londonderry and Wilmington. I want to make sure we get them in.
And
Here with us today are State Senator Rob Plunkett and State Senator Seth Bongartz. Previously, we've had on four of our local state representatives, Kathleen James, Rob Hunter, Sandy Pinsino, and Dave Durfee. And next week, we're looking forward to having with us Representatives Chris Morrow and Chris Pritchard. Chris Morrow represents the district that includes Londonderry, Winhall, Weston, and Andover. Chris Pritchard represents Paulet, Middletown Springs, Tinmouth, Wells, and Rupert. So by the time we're all done, we'll have gotten the big picture of everything underway in Montpelier. So, gentlemen, again, thank you very much for making the time for this conversation. Really appreciate that. I guess usually I'd kind of start a show like this by asking you both, so what stands out to you so far and what's going on with the legislature? But there are a couple of things, obviously, that are kind of rising near the top. And the obvious place to start, I guess, would be on the education front. It was a big topic of conversation last year when you wound up passing Act 73, the Education Overhaul Act, I guess, for lack of a better term. But then the redistricting task force committee that was created out of that act came back with a different outcome than the three maps that they were expected to, and instead came up with a recommendation to allow for more, organic mergers or whatever. So I guess I just wondered, and Seth, let me start with you since you're the chair of the Senate Education Committee. What is your sense of where things stand at the moment? Are we moving forward in a certain direction, or is it kind of back to the drawing board?
Well, things are in flux.
Somewhere in between, huh?
The legislation and the whole timetable for everything unfolding did require maps coming out of that task force this summer. And so when that didn't happen, we were, both the other chair and I, we met in Rutland, a week before the session started, and we're both going, okay, now what? And we're trying to figure out how to, the path forward. But the one thing I'll say to just, that I've said several times this year in committee and otherwise is that we absolutely must do something to bring down the rate of increase in school spending. People can't pay their property taxes. And when we have a system that is generating the kind of increases that we've talked about this before, but the system we have right now, and I say this all the time, is almost ingenious in that nobody is responsible. And when nobody's been responsible, things tend not to work well. And so what we have are some districts, and I'll have to say Taconic and Green, just by way of example, since we're sitting here in Manchester, Taconic and Green has been very responsible with their spending and really worked to keep it down. But other parts of the state, that's not true. And what happens is that even districts that keep the rate low end up paying for what others have done. And so when you go to vote your budget in your community, it doesn't, you actually don't know what tax rate you're voting because that is yet to be determined. And so the system, the system doesn't work. The system's and it's also producing the absurd result that the very districts that Act 60 and Act 68 were intended to help, the districts with less taxing capacity, are actually the ones now who are way down in the spending because of that whole system. So it's ended up having a perverse result in the long run. It was all exacerbated by COVID. So the one thing we must do is bring down the rate of increase. And so we're still in the phase of figuring out the best path forward for that. The House has indeed this week put forward another map proposal. We'll see what happens with that. It calls for only supervisory districts, which does not work for rural Vermont, does not work for this area. It's not what actually the board in Bennington wants, because as opposed to supervisory unions allow for district sub-districts within that supervisory union to have different configurations under an umbrella. Supervisory districts require that everything be absolutely uniform, and so that doesn't work for areas of the state that have either independent schools or much of rural Vermont with small schools and actually tuitioning programs. So what comes out of this must in the end have supervisory districts and unions, and it must work for rural Vermont. So we're taking some testimony a little bit ahead of time on the House proposal this week, just to get a feel from some superintendents around the state or some principals and actually school board members, begin to get a feel for reactions to that and what it might be required. But my own sense is that it's hard because, to really, every area of the state has a lot of nuance about which town really goes with which. We had one person on our committee talking about how the fact that I won't even name the community, but, well, actually I will since you said it publicly, Mount Holly, it actually makes sense to have part of Mount Holly in one district and part in another. Now, I have no idea if that's a good idea or not, but the point is that to get maps right takes a lot of time, and you have to be really careful, and you have to make sure, and if you're talking about all these districts, you've really got to make sure it fits together and works on the ground where the mountains are, all of that. So all I can say is that we must come out with something that controls the rate of increase in school spending. And I'm working on something toward that end. We'll see what comes over from the House, and we'll see what we can put together.
Well, Rob, as a former director of the Mount Anthony School District, I'm sure this is a subject of great interest to you as well. I mean, is it your sense that things are at least gradually moving forward in a good direction?
Obviously, just to be clear, I called myself a school board member. I guess we were directors, but the principals and superintendent were definitely directing, and that's sort of been part of my philosophy from the beginning, is that you let the experts teach. But separate from that, and I'm kind of on the outside looking in. I haven't been in the committee meetings, but the session so far has been radically different from what I expected. I'd expected we'd come back, we'd have maps, and we'd have something that really right at the beginning of the session, everyone would be talking about more or less a final version. And that obviously is not what happened at all. And a lot of it was talking about, okay, so how are we going to put in a stopgap so that the projection was some 12% on average of education property tax increases. How are we going to put a stopgap for that in again this year? And there are a couple of proposals. One, again, a buy down that's from the governor's office. Another, essentially a cap on spending. It's a little more nuanced than just a flat cap. But those are the two things that I've been mostly talking about, is what's the best way to limit the impact come the next tax season. And part of me thinks, okay, the buy downs, they're not perfect, but they make sense in some way, just in the sense of, well, we're using a different type of tax to fund our schools. And the longer term, and perhaps by the end of the session, as Seth was saying, there might be some sort of governance model that will have a impact on reducing the increase, or at least perhaps make someone accountable, or at least maybe a couple of people accountable that can then say, this is the reasons why, and either be voted out, or you have more pressure put on them to pull levers, rather than everyone wondering in the end what happened. And on that route, Superintendent Payne, he hadn't put together, but his finance team had put together a one-pager that more or less showed how education financing works now. or rather showed how incredibly complicated it is. And it was a very useful tool, I know, for the superintendent and for us as well. So that was helpful. But those have been my conversations. I don't have any answers, and I'm not in the nitty-gritty of this yet. One thing that we haven't talked about that hasn't come to the fore yet, which might be in my committee, and that's institutions committee, is state funding for school construction. Has not been part of the conversation. I don't think it has been part of your conversation either. A little bit, yeah. Which is another major factor, that it's been 20 plus years ish since there's been any state funding for school construction, and that's something that, well, frankly, I'm hoping that we'll talk about more and have something on track. But that also is going to be a little ways down the way.
I think it's probably some of the last state money for school construction was probably for the Mount Anthony Middle School.
It was the middle school.
That was the last.
That was the last one.
2007, 2008.
20 years, I think. Yeah. So just to fill in, Rob spurred me a couple of thoughts. The notion of buying down the rate, which we've been doing for the last few years. Right. It's important to understand that every time we do that, it by definition makes it worse the next year, because the rates continue to go up, but the real money isn't there from the system to fill it. So every time you do it, the hole gets bigger for the following year. And so what I've been saying in committee, and I'm pretty sure it's true, is that this is the last year we're going to buy it on a rate. We can't do it anymore. The money's not there.
Yep.
And so and that's why Phil Baruth's proposal for the 3% cap, as Rob says, it's become more variable, but the idea, call it the 3% cap. Blunt instrument, it's what we have to do. And we have to do that, and then we have to follow up with a longer term solution. I've been working more on the longer term solution, the part that Phil Bruce, to your 3% is in the finance committee. So hopefully that'll come out, and then we can follow that up with a longer term solution. That's what we need to do.
Did you think the redistricting task force's report had some good ideas in it, though? I mean, it seemed like it would emphasize this, what is it, CISA?
CISA,
struggling
another
with
word for
the,
both. It's regional sharing.
Comprehensive education and sharing, yes. I mean, because it seems like at the core, both the idea is to redraw the state maps so that there are fewer supervisor unions or supervisor districts or school districts, get at the idea of lowering administrative costs, right? We're not going to need fewer teachers, perhaps. We might need fewer superintendents or business managers or administrative personnel.
Yeah, there's some, that makes sense. And it's not a whole solution, but it can bring down costs. Windham County's been doing it for the last few years. They're the county that's really taken advantage of the so-called BOCES, and I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but the regional sharing, and it's actually helped bring down costs. So yeah, that's absolutely worth looking at, and it can be part of the solution, but it's not the whole solution. The other thing I'll say about maps is the other option is to let it happen organically. Put the downward pressure on by just bringing the foundation formula into being, which has a starting point and then a fixed multiplier. So it will absolutely bring down costs, and it will put some downward pressure on spending. And as it does that, and if we put some merger grants and help districts merge, another possibility is for it to happen organically, which a lot of people are speaking favorably about.
Now, you mentioned the foundation formula. We should probably explain that that's basically a fixed amount of money per student that would follow each student into each school district. And the school districts have to learn to live within that boundary, 15,000 or so per student.
Well, it's more with weights,
right.
So that's the base. But fixed amount per weighted student. So everybody pays the same per 100 statewide. Everybody gets the same per weighted student back.
Okay.
And the fixed multiplier is the key to that. A fixed starting point and then a fixed multiplier. So it's predictable. Tim Payne has said to us several times, I just want predictability. And that provides predictability.
Okay. So the other thing I wanted to just ask, and you mentioned this also earlier, I think it was Phil Conlon, the chair of the House Education Committee.
Peter Conlon.
Peter Conlon, excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm getting it mixed up with Phil
it's okay.
Barroth
Yeah,
here, right?
yeah.
It came up with a proposal for a map of 27 supervisory districts. Is that like intended just as a starting point kind of thing to get a conversation going to say, okay, well, if not this way, then we could do it some other way? That's basically what's going on.
It's a starting point, and when people see the map, they shouldn't assume that it's going to be anywhere near what's going to be in the end. It's like, here's our starting point to talk, and I wouldn't. When I saw it, I thought, okay. But then hearing his conversation about it, essentially that this is a flawed map is how he presented it. So, but it's a starting point to get the conversation going.
But the part we have to pay particular attention to is there's both the map and then there's the language that goes with it. Insisting, as it apparently does at this point, that it be all SDs is a serious problem. So we have to, the map with some flexibility built in for areas that want to be SUs and areas that want to be SDs, that's fine. So we just have to get to that. It really has to work for rural Vermont. We've taken a lot of testimony in my committee from rural Vermont, and where supervisory unions are very important to having it work for them.
And have you heard any feedback around the whole question of small schools being closed as part of all of this? I mean, it seems like that's just an inevitable part of the dynamic when you talk about how do we reduce education spending, that there's just going to be, and I know nobody likes this or wants it, but there are going to be communities where the school has just reached a point where the enrollment has gotten to a point where it doesn't make economic sense or education sense either to keep it open. But at the same time, the counter argument is, but that's the soul of the community, or that's the heartbeat of the town, as we all go to watch the kids do something. How do you think you're going to thread that needle?
Right. Well, one way is to let it happen organically. There's also a difference. We had in the language in the bill last year was about community schools, more, I forget the terminology, regional middle schools and regional high schools. So a progression. Smaller elementary schools are not quite as problematic as high schools that are just too small. But I think, we're seeing around the state right now, Taconic and Green being an example of small schools closing because that's what needs to happen. And if you add to that the downward pressure of the foundation formula, it will happen in places. But the decision will then be made there. Will be made locally, and they'll be able to decide if it makes sense to keep a smaller school open or not. In some cases, by the way, we've heard a lot of testimony from smaller schools that are doing really well. So the one size fits all is always a little scary to me. Because one size fits all really can have some results that don't make sense on the ground.
No two towns are alike.
Yeah.
Well, let me pivot from there over to another question. I guess that kind of came up last week that you both were involved with. That was the issue around the appointments of Christine Nolan and Michael Drescher to the state Supreme Court. They were both nominated by Governor Phil Scott. Christine Nolan got a fairly quick okay from the Judiciary Committee. Mr. Drescher didn't get a yay or a nay, it seemed, as I understand it anyway, didn't get a recommendation for or against. When it came to a vote, it was a 10-10 tie or 15-15 split in the Senate, and Lieutenant Governor Rogers cast a tie-breaking vote to put Mr. Drescher in. But you two voted for Mr. Drescher, and I guess I've caught a certain amount of pushback around that vote. I mean, I'll let you explain this, and Rob, I'll turn to you on this one as as someone in the judiciary area, since, and I should have mentioned when we're introducing you, you're deputy state's attorney down at the Bennington County office there. So what was the issue around Michael Drescher that made him problematic?
Well, he wasn't problematic to me. In fact, going into this, I had more concerns regarding Christina Nolan than Michael Drescher. And just to sort of take a step back, you mentioned I'm a deputy state's attorney, so I'm a government lawyer. Christina Nolan was a government lawyer for most of her career. Michael Drescher was a government lawyer for most of his career. And that's who we had in front of him. In the Senate, there were three attorneys, myself, Seth, and Nader Hashim. Nader Hashim is the chair of the Judiciary Committee, and they held hearings on both of these candidates over a series of weeks. And one of the things that I've been mentioning every time is that the way Senator Hashim ran those hearings was phenomenal. And I heard from one person specifically, they said it made them proud to be a Vermonter. And that was what I was feeling at the same time. Senator Hashim and I talked about the issues for the entire 3 weeks. And really what it boiled down to with Michael Drescher was that he essentially handled two cases that were incredibly controversial, cases that should never have been in Vermont to begin with, people that should never have been arrested to begin with. And then Michael Drescher made he only had a series of bad choices to make in terms of how his office, and he was in charge of the office at the time, but how his office was going to respond to the cases, which were petitions for habeas corpus, where the government's the defendant in that case, so the government doesn't start the case. It started by the folks that were detained essentially saying we should be released. And the issues regarding having those cases in Vermont were complex. And Mr. Drescher, instead of assigning it to someone else in his office, he took it on himself, knowing the heat that would be taken. And ultimately, at the time, he didn't, because as he mentioned, what he did was he did his job. And the job hadn't been defined. The way I saw his job and a lawyer's job and any government attorney's job is to make sure that justice prevails in whatever case you're representing your client on. And as a lawyer, I went into this with both Christina Nolan and Michael Drescher thinking, we're lawyers, we represent clients, the positions aren't our positions. What really matters is, did we do it ethically, and did we make sure that in the end justice prevailed? And I think we saw that happen here. And this was a lot of sort of soul searching for me, because the ultimate question was, well, he's working for this Trump regime. And so therefore he must be tossed out into the cold. And my thinking on that was, well, that's not what we want. We don't want our institutions that have been functioning for a long time to only be to only have folks that are political appointees or don't know the law, have no scruples, don't make sure that they follow only what's ethical. And my view of it was, Mr. Drescher and the rest of his office, they really were resisting the Trump administration during this whole past year. And one thing that was interesting is folks had been talking about the difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2, because during Trump 1, Christina Nolan was the political appointed U.S. attorney. So Trump technically had appointed her. And one of the explanations that was given to me was that during Trump 1, administration in Washington didn't know how to get in the way of the professionals in Washington. So they weren't able to reach down and put pressure on the local offices. This time they were, and I think that what we saw was something that was as good of a bad choice as could possibly have been made. But separately from that, Mr. Drescher, there were two cases that were significant over a 20-plus year career in the U.S. Attorney's Office, plus 5-6 years before that in private practice. And so his entire career was one of being apolitical, being incredibly intelligent, and being very analytical about the law. And I talked to him a lot. I got to know him. And in talking to him, I realized a couple of things. One, his legal acumen is something that I aspire to. That is the type of legal thinking that I want. Very detail-oriented, really making sure that the rule of law is followed. And the other part of it was more or less my feeling for him is that he treasures the Vermont Constitution and recognizes how different it is from the federal Constitution. And that's something that is important because he's going to be dealing with probably issues regarding federal overreach. And he knows how the federal system is supposed to work. So when he has something before him on the bench where he's seeing how it's functioning poorly, I know he will be one that can recognize the issues and make the right choices for Vermont. And in the end, that was a lot of what was part of my thinking. Although there are many, many reasons for this. And Senator Hashim and I, we talked to each other. We both lost sleep over the weeks, and I was actually very, very proud to be mentioned in his speech. He didn't mention me by name, but I'm the lawyer that said to him,
Okay.
"Doesn't it sometimes?
I
I forget exactly what it is. Isn't it sometimes terrible to be a lawyer?" So I think we both had a great deal of respect for each other. We ultimately came down on different sides, but I think a lot of our thinking really wasn't parallel, although we reached a different conclusion in the end. So that's sort of a more long-winded, but also doesn't completely explain the entirety of the reason for the yes vote. But
Let me give a little bit of let me tell a story that helps with that. Couple things. Rob and I had both candidates come to Manchester and meet with us 2 Saturdays in a row. And we spent an hour and a half with Michael Drescher, actually testing, probing, taking all the arguments we'd heard against him and sort of pushing him on. And we did the same thing with Christina Nolan this following Saturday. But as Rob talks about ethics and dealing ethically, one of the things Michael said to us, which is in a way is obvious, but it's important to remember it, is that the difference, or a key distinction here, a key thing to keep in mind is the notion of a neutral arbiter. It's not like Michael Drescher was making any decisions. The neutral arbiter, the judge, was making decisions. And so as Rob was saying, the notion that you have to have, there must be 2 attorneys in order for anything to be in front of a judge. And so, and having the U.S. attorney, by the way, he was never appointed by Trump. There was no U.S. attorney, so because he was senior, he became the acting. Presenting that evidence ethically, not trying to game it, not trying to force delays so they keep him in jail longer, or none of that, and just presenting the facts. But then the story I want to tell is that 2 things, is that during the hearing of, I can never remember how to pronounce her name.
Rumesa Oster.
After her defense attorney put on the case, he didn't do a cross-examination. You never do that. That was a signal to the judge, frankly. But even more importantly is that after Judge Sessions, by the way, She was in Louisiana, being held in Louisiana, came through Vermont, and they whisked her to Louisiana, hoping to avoid,
And this is the one who was a student at, I think, Tufts University, who
Tufts.
got picked up off the street.
Yes,
Yep.
yeah, for
About a year ago,
speech,
actually, now at this
speech
point.
issue.
Yeah, she had written an op-ed in the
Yeah.
campus newspaper, and
So-
it was critical of Gaza. Or
So what happened though is that she was in Louisiana, but the case remained here because we asserted jurisdiction. We had jurisdiction. From the bench, he ordered her released without condition. The authorities in Louisiana refused to do it. They said, we're not going to do that. She's not getting out of here without a tracking device and ankle bracelet. To her credit, she refused it. She refused, saying, you're not doing that. That's not what the order. And the ACLU attorney who had defended her, she was actually with her in Louisiana, called Michael Drescher and said, here's what's going on. They won't release her. Michael Drescher said, stay on the line. Let's get Judge Sessions. They got Judge Sessions. Michael said, a written order would be helpful to effect your order. So 10 minutes later, we had a written order from Judge Sessions. He sent it down and got her released. The point of that story is that if Michael Drescher had resigned or refused to do it, and then we had a Trump hack in his place, he wouldn't have even taken a call from the ACLU attorney, let alone tried to effect the order that he didn't agree with. And so that's the difference between keeping a system, this whole office in Vermont, made up of attorneys with integrity, versus what would happen if first Michael resigned and then the others all left. Because it's an office, built with that ethos of integrity and honesty with the court and not gaming the system, and to have what you have in other parts of the country right now, loaded with Trump hacks, where the courts are going, you're lying to us, you're not credible, all the things that are happening across the country, that's not happening here. And so even though it's an awful situation to be in, to have to present a case you really don't believe in, and I know that's what happened here, thank God he did it. And so, we both have, I started off when these nominations were made. I actually had the same starting point as Rob. I was especially worried about Christina Nolan out of the box. But then Michael Drescher became much more controversial. And the more we talked every day for 2.5 weeks or whatever it was. We both talked individually I talked with Nader, Senator Hashim. I talked with Michael Drescher before and after that hour and a half. I really just came to realize that he really did the right thing in a situation where he had no good choices, and I just really came to the conclusion he's a thoroughly decent human being, as Rob said, unbelievable attorney, and smart, and would make a great addition to the court.
Well, it must have been an interesting situation on multiple levels. I mean, you were the only two Democrats, I think, in the state Senate that voted for him. All the other members of your party were opposed. That must have been a complicated dynamic, I would imagine. But, well, let's move on from there to something a little more prosaic, perhaps, and that's the eternal question of how the state is going to be working on its housing shortage, to really jump back into a subject that's been talked about for a long time now. Last year, or actually I guess it was like 2 years ago, you were able to pass the Act 181, which I guess was a kind of a revision of Act 250, more than 50-year-old Act 250. And as probably everybody who's watching and listening to us talk today knows, oh yeah, we have a housing shortage like just about every other state in the country does. But I guess I just wondered, in big picture, kind of, are we starting to see some progress towards solving that? I mean, the governor has talked about needing to build something like 30,000 new houses by 2030. That seems like a lot. But what do we see as kind of the main roadblocks at this point? I mean, is it just the usual suspects like construction costs and labor costs. I guess where I'm going with this question is, what do you think the state government can do to kind of make this go faster?
So,
if anything.
I mean, so I was one of the authors of Act 181. Amy Schell and I were the authors. So people talked for a long time about the regulatory roadblocks. What we did over the course of 5 years was remove all kinds of regulatory roadblocks to getting housing built, especially in downtowns. And the Act 250 bill, the Act 181, actually says that in areas, and I'll just use common terms rather than technical language here, but in community centers and downtowns, especially if they have sewer and water or suitable soils, you basically can build housing without having to go through Act 250. We've already made the decision, because that's where we want housing, and so there's a good portion of Vermont can be exempt from Act 250, and we did things at the zoning level in the previous session to help make it easier to build in those areas as well. So I think we've gone a long way toward making it easier to build in areas that we know it makes sense to build in downtowns. The other thing is, it's actually happening. The permit applications are up and the number of houses getting built are up. It's partially because we used ARPA money over those preceding 5 years to put in some infrastructure, sewer and water, sewer and water lines, help make it easier to improve mobile home parks, the VHIP program for middle class housing, and or actually just to rehab housing. And the other thing is, this is where it gets really interesting. So we've done a lot on the regulatory front. The other thing that's going on is that the Department of Housing and Community Development is really doing some good work with a program called 802 Housing it's really about, the best analogy possible is the old Sears houses that you could order online. And they were great houses, but they were inexpensive because everything was the same, so they could be factory built. Effectively,
houses.
In a way, they were prefab houses, but they're great houses. And so they've been working for the last 10 years on the hard work of so the idea is to have a set of plans, 15 housing types or whatever, that can fit in different places for infill development, especially in downtowns. They can work anywhere, but especially in downtowns. And they can be then pre-approved by the fire marshal, pre-approved by the community for the designs. And so all you have to do is go into the zoning administrator and effectively get the boxes checked and get a permit for the construction. Blueprints made available at no cost, construction drawings made available at no cost to contractors. And bulk ordering of parts. So it's in a way the state helping facilitate the equivalent of Sears houses, but also working on the regulatory front as well to make it easier, like getting the pre-approval from the fire marshal. They're all designed. You build it that way, it's done. You've got and the towns pre-approving those designs. And they're also designed so that they can be either stick-built, if you want to use the construction drawings and stick-build them, or they're working with some of the factories in Vermont to actually change their whole production apparatus to build these houses. You get the materials at a lower cost if everything's the same, and then you can build year-round rather than just I've been in one of those factories before. Middle of the winter, and they're working in T-shirts, and they can build with modules. So this is now the hard work of actually getting it done. So dealt with the regulatory front in large measure, and then now the hard work of doing things to bring the cost down from here to here. And then maybe even we still may need to fill a little bit of a gap, but then if the state's working to fill a small gap, it's a lot less expensive than the state doing what we've been doing now, building, spending a lot of money on an individual house. So it's really kind of exciting. I think that the program has real potential and is beginning to take hold.
Well, that would be certainly great news for
Yeah.
a lot of people who would love to live in Vermont but can't seem to find a place to live. And the intersection of housing across so many pieces of the economy of the state and social life is just amazing. Rob, let me turn back to you on another kind of legal question. There's a bill, I understand, in the Senate or somewhere in the State House that would keep separate Vermont law enforcement agencies from helping with federal agencies on the immigration question. Is there anything happening on that?
Yeah, and that one I don't know if there's anything happening on it. I know there's some issues with that. I believe we did pass last year a bill that in emergencies the governor would be required to authorize those agreements with the feds. What's more interesting this year, two bills.
Meaning they can't happen without that authorization.
Right. The government. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
As it was right now,
Yeah.
local agencies could do it on their own previously. Now, if I'm remembering correctly,
Yeah,
the governor
I
is
think
the
you're
only
right.
one that could approve it. But right now, more interestingly, two bills have legs, 208 and 209, S208 and S209. I don't remember which is which. One of them is essentially prohibiting law enforcement from wearing masks except in specific instances, and the other is prohibiting arrest without warrant, without warrant signed by a judge in particular protected places. Right now, the courts, I believe, are protected from that, which is not unusual, and this would expand it to schools, churches, places where people have to go simply to live their lives. And there'll be a press conference on that on Wednesday, I think at 2:00, just sort of describing it a little bit. But the way I look at it is, these are fundamental aspects of due process where if you're going to be pursuing an LNA, for instance, and that was the person in Manchester from last summer, who is going to be arrested on the street, it shouldn't be done by people that act like terrorists. So jackboots are perhaps not due process in America, and I think most people generally agree with that. I know there's been a lot of legal research, especially into the masking, but also the other bill on whether or not can the states do anything to regulate how federal law enforcement acts within their territory. And I know that they're doing a deep dive to see whether or not it would pass constitutional muster. I expect that both of these might be passed. I hope neither one would be vetoed, and these I would expect would be something that would probably be challenged right away into the courts. And so I'm actually looking forward to that, because I think that in the sort of the reverse of how I grew up in terms of who argues for states' rights, I think it's fairly fundamental that states have the ability to protect their population from government overreach in every step, and especially in Vermont, where we have a tradition where we have a constitution that extends greater rights to our population than the federal constitution does, and we hold on to that dearly. So these two bills I'm really looking forward to, and I know I sort of answered your question, but then moved on to a different one. But those are far more interesting and exciting things that I think Vermont can do in reaction to what we're seeing, which is a completely different federal government than what we've seen before. We've been talking about this a lot, obviously, and I heard from our congressional delegation. I heard a couple of things that gave me some hope. The first thing was folks in Congress are recognizing that our immigration statutes were written in such a vague way that they relied on good faith to really be enforced correctly. And when there's a bad faith actor who's using this vague language to, as I mentioned, to start a campaign of terror. That's when you really have to go back and you have to look, and we're going to have to change that so that this can't happen again. And the other thing that gave me hope was just simply the general feeling, and obviously I'm not there, but the general feeling in Washington and Congress that we're going to get through this. This isn't going to last forever. And so, oddly enough, that's how we felt about every president, but I think a lot of folks are really wondering about that, is how fundamentally is this going to change? And I think our nation is resilient enough to make it through the next 3 years. So that's this very brief spiel on the sort of immigration enforcement front right now in Vermont.
This is a subject of great interest to me. It's puzzling why we as a country, and I realize we're kind of veering off away from state issues, but why we can't figure out a system where there's that's been described, I think, as a high wall with a wide gate, but simply fix the front door kind of thing, where there's a certain number of people can come in from a certain parts of the world, and then you have a system whereby somebody isn't stuck waiting years and years and years someplace. I don't know if it was ever better at some point in the past, and we're just going through a period in history right now where there's more people want to come here or used to want to come here than was the case in the past. But it just seems like we don't do a very good job of letting people have an orderly process. I'm assuming most people would probably rather, work with the embassy in whatever country they're from rather than making a trek through a jungle and pay a lot of money to smugglers to get them to where they want to go.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this. First of all, our nation is a nation of immigrants, always has been. It's gone up and down through the centuries. The other is that you're actually absolutely right. The bureaucratic steps to go through getting into this country legally is impossible. It's impossible to do it without a lawyer, and it's impossible to do it even if you do have a lawyer, because most people that want to come here simply can't afford it. So it's relatively easy for folks that have a lot of resources to be able to be in the country legally, either to become a citizen or to work here. If you're dirt poor and if you're running from perhaps an oppressive regime, you have no answers, and you run into a bureaucratic brick wall. And there are lots and lots of people that are doing really wonderful work to try to smooth that out, but it's a Byzantine system. And it's obviously not something that Vermont's going to answer, but there are very good reasons why folks try to avoid it. It's not that they're doing something fundamentally wrong, it's that there's no other option for them. And that's most of the folks that we're seeing here who come here illegally. And unfortunately, many of those folks are also then further exploited. Which is a whole another aspect. But just to bounce off your question, we need these folks, and I'm on the agriculture committee, and what we hear over and over and over again is that a lot of these folks are absolutely needed for our farms.
Sure.
They are the people that are growing our food, and frankly, we need to grow a lot more of it. So this has been had an impact on food security in general as well. So there's lots of different aspects that can fit into this.
I just want to pick up on Rob's thread about the good faith. A lot of these people are being arrested when they go for their citizenship interviews, or when they've been working their way through the system to get to the point that they can be fully legal, and they show up for one of those and they get arrested. I mean, that is bad faith. That's despicable. And so a lot of the people who are being arrested have been doing the right thing. And we're operating, or the administration is operating in incredibly bad faith. and making it just impossible to get toward what you're talking about, because you're absolutely right. We need to have a functioning immigration system, and the reason that we're where we are in part is for the last 30 years we have not had a functioning immigration system, and so desperate people do desperate things, and then but.
We could talk about this
yes,
subject all by itself for a long time,
yeah,
but before we have to run, I just thought I'd quickly just ask you both real quick, anything in particular going on in your respective committees that you want the viewers to know about? We talked about education a lot. I know, Rob, you're in agriculture, and was it Committee on Institutions? But I guess Seth, you're also on the Natural Resources Committee, where you had that fascinating plug-in solar bill going on, right?
Yeah. That was fun.
We talked about last week, whatever.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on in agriculture this year. We have a 45-page committee bill that ranges from municipal regulation to where you can place solar fields, to tax implications, and a couple of other more or less housekeeping issues, but it was a lot more than I had expected, and we're working through them slowly. I think luckily part of the income tax section will probably not stay in there, because you can open many doors on that, but it's a lot of it's fascinating. That touches on agriculture as well as many other aspects of the law. And in institutions, we'll probably be getting the data privacy bill back in a very different form from the House, and so I'm looking forward to that, because it's a very interesting topic, and I know, and I'll give a plug, that Representative Priestley will be here in a week to talk about that. So you'll be getting a sort of preview of that before I do.
Well, maybe you want to stop by.
So I'll be your typical politician and not answer your question. I'll answer a different question.
Okay.
Just because we're down to the last couple of minutes, we haven't talked about healthcare.
Right.
And the cost of healthcare,
well,
and the cost of insurance,
okay,
that was next. All right. So I just want to make sure we didn't run out of time.
Because, as we all know, hospitals in Vermont are struggling. Health insurance costs are rising. So, what can you tell us about it?
Well, a couple of things, but especially this, just so it doesn't get left out. Saturday, February 21st, 11 o'clock, the Firehouse in Bennington. We have Senator Ginny Lyons, the chair of the Senate Healthcare Committee, coming down to be on I guess we'll be there, but she'll be the expert. Robert and I will be in the panel, but it'll really be Ginny. And talking about some of the things that we've done to date to control the cost of healthcare. Insurance really just is a reflection of the cost of healthcare in large measure. So some of the things we've done to save Blue Cross from going under, but also reference-based pricing, price control on the amount that can be charged for drugs. Some things that have actually lowered the cost of health insurance last year, and then what they're working on this year. How she sees the whole, primary care versus hospital care, some of the things we're doing to incentivize that, and I think the other thing going on in healthcare is that the other thing we did last year is we gave the healthcare board, the Green Mountain Care Board, more authority than it had in the past to really help control the rates of increase and make some tough decisions. And we're at a point where, just like with education, we have no choice but to make some tough decisions. And so we are bringing her down just so that people who are thinking about this issue, which is everybody, can come and get a real sense of what's going on and where we are making progress. And we have to be, just to be really clear here, this is one of those times when there are no villains. There are only institutions and individuals trying to do the best they can under really difficult circumstances. So, our hospitals are struggling, primary care physicians are struggling, the whole system is struggling. People can't begin to afford the cost of insurance. Some of the stories I hear about the cost of insurance is just mind-boggling. It's not like another mortgage. It's like 2 more mortgages. And so the system is under incredible strain. It's the really scary thing in Vermont right now. From I think is the cost of healthcare and the cost of insurance and what we're going to do about it. So we've got her coming down on the 21st at 11.
All right. Well, mark your calendars, folks. Well, I guess we'll have to leave it there. Gosh, so many other things we could talk about, but we'll save it for another time. Maybe when you come back, when the session's over, to give us the postscript on what actually did happen or whatever.
How everything went perfectly.
Yeah, we solved the whole thing.
Yeah.
Healthcare, you know.
Funny how we keep having that same joke.
It's amazing.
Solved healthcare.
All right. Well, again, we'll leave it there for today. But again, I want to thank State Senators Rob Plunkett and Seth Bongartz for being with us to bring us up to speed on what's happening under the Golden Dome in Montpelier. And, well, like I said, we'll have to have you guys back again in a couple of months to tell us how it all turned out.
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thanks to all of you who've been with us again today. Hope you found the program interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Take care.